The magazine had arrived in yesterday's mail, wedged between a gas bill and a circular for a local grocery store. I hadn't thought much of it. My son, Alex, had mentioned something about an interview with a business journal, and I'd assumed this was it. I'd left it on the table, planning to read it with my morning tea. A small ritual, a moment of maternal pride. The paper was thick, glossy, and cool to the touch. It smelled of money and fresh ink. On the cover was a photograph of my son. He was leaning against a polished steel coffee roaster, a confident, easy smile on his face. He was wearing a dark, tailored shirt I'd never seen before. He looked like a stranger, a handsome, successful stranger who happened to have my son's eyes. The headline, in a bold, clean font, was sprawled across his chest: the Alexander Raid, the man who built an empire from the ground up. Entanglement. I stared at the words. From the ground up. Annoying. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. I carried the magazine to the table and sat down. My tea had gone tepid. I opened the magazine, the stiff pages making a soft tearing sound in the quiet kitchen. The article was 6 pages long, filled with beautiful, artfully lit photographs of his roastery, Ascend Coffee, with its exposed brick walls, its gleaming equipment, and its staff of bright, energetic young people. And then there was the text. I began to read. "Key started with nothing," Alex was quoted as saying on the first page. "Just an idea and a relentless belief in the quality of the bean. People told me I was crazy to sink everything I had into it." My eyes blurred for a moment. I looked up from the page and stared at the worn linoleum floor. The floor my husband George and I had installed ourselves one sweltering July weekend. My mind slipped back. I was in this same kitchen 10 years ago. But it was cluttered, filled with the ghosts of a different life. Alex was sitting right where I was sitting now, his hands animated, his eyes on fire with his vision. He wasn't a stranger then. He was my boy. He spread architectural drawings across this very table, the scent of his ambition so strong, it was almost a physical thing. He spoke of roasting profiles and single-origin beans, and a direct-to-consumer model that would revolutionize the industry. It was a beautiful dream. A beautiful, expensive dream. He needed $200,000 to make it real. I turned back to the magazine. My hand trembled slightly. It was a bootstrapped operation in the truest sense, the article continued. Every penny I earned from my old job, every hour of sleep I lost, it all went into Ascend. There was no safety net. It was succeed or lose everything. That kind of pressure forges you. No safety net, Daddy. The words seemed to lift off the page and mock me. I remembered the nights, the endless, worried nights, sitting at this table with George. He was a quiet man, a careful man, a man who had worked 40 years as a union electrician to provide for his family, a man who believed in pensions and savings bonds and the slow, steady accumulation of a life built with caution. "It's his passion, George," I'd argued, my own voice full of a hope I was trying to borrow from Alex. "Look at him. He's never been this alive." "It's a coffee shop, Ev," George had said, his voice heavy with a weariness I didn't understand at the time. "People don't get rich selling coffee." But Alex wasn't just selling coffee. He was selling a story of craft, of passion, of a young visionary. He sold it to me first. And then, together, we sold it to the bank. The safety net he claimed not to have was this house. The house George and I had bought as newlyweds. The house where we had raised our son. The house we had finally, blessedly, paid off just 2 years before Alex came to us with his dream. We took out a second mortgage. We signed the papers at a long, polished table in a cold, quiet bank office. I remember the loan officer, a young man with polished shoes and impersonal eyes. He hadn't looked at us. He had looked at the appraisal value of our home. We were not a couple in our 60s, gambling our future on our son's dream. We were a column of numbers, an acceptable risk. I kept reading. Each sentence was a small, sharp cut. He talked about the lean, early years, the sacrifices he had to make. I thought of the sacrifices. They were not his. I thought of George's coin collection, the one he had started as a boy, a heavy album filled with silver dollars and mercury dimes. Solidaiu, guy? I thought of my mother's jewelry, the few good pieces I had saved, a string of pearls, a pair of sapphire earrings. Solidaiu. I thought of the vacations we never took, the new car we never bought, the quiet, gnawing anxiety that became a permanent resident in our home, sitting at our dinner table, lying in our bed at night. I thought of George. The stress of the loan, the constant worry, had settled deep in his bones. He started working side jobs, wiring houses for extra cash, coming home exhausted, his hands raw, the familiar, clean scent of sawdust replaced by the smell of ozone and fatigue. He grew quiet. The easy laugh that had been the soundtrack of my life grew infrequent, then rare. The doctor called it hypertension. He said George needed to reduce his stress. We both just nodded, the unspoken truth a heavy, suffocating blanket in the sterile examination room. The stress was our son's dream. The stress was the second mortgage. The stress was the monthly payment that was always, just barely, met. George didn't live to see Ascend Coffee become a success. He died of a heart attack 2 years into the venture, on a cold Tuesday in November. I found him in his armchair, a half-finished cup of coffee on the table beside him. Not the expensive, artisan coffee his son was selling. It was the cheap, canned coffee from the grocery store. The kind we could afford. The business almost died with him. The bank called the loan. Alex, his face pale with a grief that was mingled with sheer panic, came to me, his beautiful dream turning to ash in his hands. And I saved it. I saved him. I used the entirety of George's life insurance payout, the money that was supposed to be my safety net, to pay off the bank, to keep the doors of Ascend Coffee open. It was the last, final sacrifice. A promise I made to a ghost. I'll take care of our boy. Edanan, Ande, Ganasewai, Taburaci. The magazine was heavy in my lap now. I flipped to the last page of the article. There was another photo of Alex, this one an action shot. He was holding up a cup of coffee, his expression one of deep, serious contemplation. A connoisseur. A creator. A man who had done it all alone. Any regrets? The interviewer asked. Gonly that my father didn't get to see this, Alex said. Hey, was my biggest believer. I like to think he's looking down, proud of what I've built. The hypocrisy of it was so vast, so complete, it was almost sublime. It wasn't a lie. It was an erasure. He had rewritten history. He had taken our lives, our work, our sacrifice, our home, George's very death, and he had edited it all out of the story. He had left only himself, the lone hero, standing in the spotlight. I closed the magazine. I placed it on the table. I did not cry. I did not scream. The grief and the anger were old, worn-out friends. What I felt now was something new. A profound, chilling clarity. It was the clarity of a person who has been pushed out of a moving car and is now standing, dazed, on the side of the road, watching the taillights disappear into the distance. The man in the magazine was a stranger. A stranger who had built his empire on the foundations of my life, and then claimed the plot of land had always been empty. I stood up and carried my cold mug to the sink. The faucet was still dripping. Drip, died. Pause. Drip, died. A small, persistent problem that needed to be fixed. I made a mental note to call a plumber. It was my house, my responsibility. It was time to start fixing things. The glossy magazine lay on the kitchen table like an accusation. For the rest of the day, I avoided it. I cleaned the house with a quiet fury. I scrubbed floors that were already clean. I polished furniture that already shone. I waged a war against every speck of dust. It was a physical manifestation of a deeper need, to scrub away the story Alex had told, to erase his erasure of me. With every swipe of the cloth, memories flooded in, sharp and unwelcome. I remembered the day the new roasting machine was delivered. It was too large to fit through the front door of the rented warehouse space. Alex had called me in a panic. It's a disaster, Mom. They're going to charge me a restocking fee. I'm ruined. He didn't have the money to hire a crane. It was George who had figured it out. He'd spent 2 hours with a tape measure and a crowbar and found that by removing the doorframe and part of the wall, they could just barely squeeze it in. He'd spent the rest of the weekend, his only days off, rebuilding the wall, his knuckles scraped raw, covered in plaster dust. Alex had clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Thanks, Pops. You're a lifesaver." Then he'd left to meet friends for a celebratory dinner. George and I had stayed behind to sweep up the mess. I remembered the launch party. Alex had rented a trendy art gallery. He'd invited food bloggers and local journalists. He needed to make a good impression. He didn't have money for catering, so I had catered it. For 2 days, this kitchen had been a frantic, flour-dusted factory. I had baked hundreds of miniature scones, lemon tarts, and chocolate biscotti. My hands had ached. My back had screamed. At the party, I stood in the back, a ghost in a sensible dress, refilling platters, while Alex, my handsome, charming son, accepted compliments on the wonderful food. When a local reporter asked him who his caterer was, he just smiled his easy smile and said, "Oh, it's just a little place. A family secret." My family. My secret. That night, sleep would not come. I lay in my bed, the bed I had shared with George for 42 years, and the silence of the house was a roaring in my ears. The silence was filled with the things I had never said, the sacrifices I had never tallied, the thank yous I had never received. I had allowed myself to become invisible. I had done it out of love. But looking back, I saw that it wasn't just love. It was fear. Fear of his disapproval. Fear of his anger. Fear of him failing, because his failure felt like my failure. I had tied my worth so tightly to his success that I had been willing to be erased in the process. The man in the magazine wasn't a stranger. I had helped create him. I had taught him that my labor, my money, my life, was an invisible resource he could draw upon without consequence or acknowledgement. I had taught him that the ground beneath his feet would always be solid, without ever asking him to look down and see who was holding it up. I finally got out of bed as the first pale, gray light of dawn touched the window. The house was cold. I walked into the kitchen. The magazine was still there, a slick, dark rectangle on the oak table. I picked it up, and this time I did not open it. I walked through the house to the small spare bedroom at the back. This was the room I had cleared out when George died. It held my sewing machine, a bookshelf, and a small sturdy desk where I paid my bills. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. My fingers found a thick accordion-style folder. The plastic clasp was stiff. I hadn't opened it in years. The label in my own handwriting said, "Household, paid." Indianen. I carried it back to the kitchen table. The sun was rising now, casting long, gentle shadows across the floor. I opened the folder. Inside was a history. Not the one Alex had written, but the real one. It was a history told in receipts and statements. I took out the thick stack of papers bound by a rubber band, the original mortgage documents from when George and I first bought this house. I took out the second stack, the loan agreement for the second mortgage, the one with my signature and George's, and the cold, impersonal stamp of the bank. And at the bottom of the folder, I found the last document. It was a single sheet of paper from the bank, confirming that the second mortgage, loan number 743B, had been paid in full. The date on the letter was 1 month after George's death. The payment source was listed as a direct transfer from my personal savings account. I laid the 3 documents side by side on the table. The beginning, the middle, and the end. The dream, the debt, and the deliverance. This was the real story of how Ascend Coffee was built. It was a story written, not in glossy ink, but in the dry, legalistic language of finance. It was a story of a house. My house. The decision formed in my mind, not as an angry impulse, but as a quiet, logical conclusion. A correction. A clarification. He had published his story. Now, I would show him mine. I took out a single sheet of plain white paper from the desk. I found a pen. I didn't write a long, emotional letter. There was no need for accusations or tears. The facts were enough. The facts were colder and harder than any words I could write. I wrote a simple, clear list. A timeline. Me, 2012. Second mortgage taken on property at 124 Elm Street. Principal, $200,000. Purpose. Seed capital for Ascend Coffee, LLC. And June, 2012. October 2014. Monthly payments of $1,475 made from joint account of George and Evelyn Reed. November 2014. George Reed passes away. May. In 2014, loan balance of $187,450 paid in full. Source of funds: George Reed Life Insurance Policy. Beneficiary: Evelyn Reed. And 4 lines. That was all it took. The entire history of his bootstrapped empire, summarized in 4 indisputable facts. I folded the piece of paper. I slid it into a clean white envelope. I did not seal it. Then I picked up the phone. I dialed the main number for the Ascend Coffee Roastery. A bright, cheerful young voice answered. "Good morning, Ascend Coffee. This is Chloe." "Hello, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and steady. "May I please speak to Alex Reed?" "I'm sorry, he's in a meeting right now. Can I take a message?" "No message," I said. "Just let him know his mother is on her way over. I have something for him." I hung up the phone. I stood up and looked at the 3 documents and the white envelope on my kitchen table. I picked up the single piece of paper from the bank, the one that confirmed the loan had been paid off. The proof. I slid it into the envelope with the timeline I had written. Then I walked out of my house, got into my 10-year-old car, and drove towards my son's empire. I was not going there for a confrontation. I was not going to yell or to cry. I was simply a quiet woman on her way to deliver a forgotten invoice. A reminder of a debt that had been paid in full, but never, ever acknowledged. The drive to the roastery was a journey through a landscape that was both familiar and foreign. I passed the park where I had pushed Alex on the swings, the small movie theater where he'd had his first date, the high school from which he had graduated with honors. These were the landmarks of the life I remembered, the life where I was a central character. But as I drove closer to the warehouse district, the landscape changed. Old brick buildings had been sandblasted to a trendy, rustic glow. New restaurants with single-word names and minimalist signs had replaced the old machine shops and textile factories. This was Alex's world. A world I had financed, but had never truly been a part of. I found his building easily. It was the handsomest one on the block, the old brick warmed by a large, modern sign that read Ascend in clean steel letters. I parked my old reliable sedan between a sleek black Tesla and a gleaming new SUV. For a moment, I just sat in the car, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I could see the people inside through the large plate glass windows, young, energetic, dressed in stylishly casual clothes, tapping away on laptops, sipping from ceramic mugs. It was a world away from my quiet kitchen. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. The anger and the grief had burned down to a hard, clear purpose. I was not here to start a war. I was here to deliver a fact. A single, clarifying fact. I got out of the car, the white envelope clutched in my hand. It felt as solid and real as a stone. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. It was a rich, complex, wonderful smell of roasting coffee, dark chocolate, and something else. The clean, metallic scent of success. A cheerful young woman with a nose ring and a bright smile stood behind a long, polished concrete counter. "Hi, welcome to Ascend," she chirped. "What can I get for you?" "I'm here to see Alex Reed," I said quietly. "He's expecting me." "Oh, you must be his mom," she said, her smile widening. "He said you were coming. He's just finishing up a call. Can I get you a coffee while you wait? On the house, of course." "No, thank you," I said. I did not want his coffee. I did not want anything from him. I waited in a small seating area on a sleek, uncomfortable leather sofa. I watched the life of the place buzz around me. I watched my son, my boy, moving through his kingdom. He was on the other side of a glass wall, in a minimalist office, pacing back and forth as he talked on the phone, one hand gesturing emphatically. He looked vital, important, a man in his element. He looked like the man on the cover of the magazine. He looked like a stranger. When he finished his call, he saw me. He smiled, a quick, automatic flash of charm, and beckoned me into his office. His office was beautiful. One wall was the exposed brick of the old warehouse. Another was a sheet of glass looking out onto the roastery floor. The desk was a single, massive slab of reclaimed wood. There were no family photos. No pictures of me or his father. The only art was a large, abstract painting in shades of black and gray. "Mom?" he said, coming around the desk to give me a perfunctory, one-armed hug. "Good to see you. Sorry to keep you waiting. That was a supplier from Colombia. You wouldn't believe the logistics of getting these beans through customs." He was already performing, showcasing his importance. "Hello, Alex," I said. I did not return the hug. I stood in the center of his beautiful office, a quiet, unimpressed island. "So," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs opposite his desk. "What's up? Everything okay?" He had already forgotten that I had called, that I had a reason for being here. My visit was just another small event in his busy day. I did not sit down. I simply walked to his large, clean desk, and I placed the white envelope in the very center of it. "What's this?" he asked, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "I read the article," I said, my voice even. It was very impressive, from the ground up, a powerful story. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. He broke eye contact, his gaze shifting to the gleaming roasting machines on the other side of the glass. "Yeah, well, you know how these writers are," he mumbled. "They like a good narrative." "Yes," I said. "They do, but they left out a few details. I thought you might want a copy of the real one, for your records." He looked at the envelope, then back at me. A war was happening behind his eyes, curiosity, annoyance, and a dawning, fearful understanding. He picked up the envelope. His fingers, I noticed, were perfectly manicured. He pulled out the 2 folded sheets of paper. I watched his face as he read. It was a fascinating, terrible thing to behold. I watched the easy confidence drain away, as if a plug had been pulled. I watched the color seep from his cheeks. His eyes scanned the timeline I had written, then moved to the bank statement, the one that proved in cold, hard numbers that his empire was built on his father's grave and his mother's home. He read it twice. He put the papers down on his desk as if they were burning his fingers. He sank into his large, expensive leather chair. He looked small in it. He looked like a boy who had been caught cheating on a test. He said nothing. He couldn't. The facts were right there, a neat 4-point refutation of the grand myth he had so carefully constructed. I had done what I came to do. I had delivered the truth. My part in this was over. "I'll let myself out," I said quietly. And I turned and walked away. I walked out of his office, through the bustling, fragrant cafe, and out the front door, into the bright, cold afternoon. I did not look back. As I got into my car, I felt a profound sense of release. The cold, hard knot that had been sitting in my stomach for years had finally dissolved. I had not asked for an apology. I had not asked for thanks. I had not asked for money. I had simply asked for the truth to be acknowledged, if only to him, if only to myself. The drive home was different. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way the winter sun hit the windows of the old houses, the intricate patterns of the bare tree branches against the pale blue sky. It was as if a filter had been removed from my eyes. The world looked sharper, clearer. When I got home, my house was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of absence or loneliness. It was the silence of peace. The silence of a space that was entirely my own. The first victory had been the quiet delivery of a truth. The victories that followed were smaller, but in their own way, just as profound. The next day, I called the plumber. He was a young man with a kind face, and he fixed the dripping faucet in 20 minutes. The silence in my kitchen was now absolute, a perfect, unbroken peace. I paid him with a check from my own account. It was a small act of independence, but it felt significant. After a week of silence from Alex, I made a decision. The house was too big for me. It was full of rooms I never used, rooms that held the ghosts of a life that was over. I called a real estate agent, a sensible, kind-faced woman named Mary, who held my hand as I told her, in edited form, my reasons for selling. She nodded with a quiet understanding. The "for sale" sign went up in the front yard a week later. It felt strange, seeing it there, on the lawn George and I had so carefully tended. But it also felt right. It was not a home anymore. It was an asset, a piece of real estate. Alex had taught me to see it that way, and I was finally cashing out my investment. The house sold in less a month, for a price that made me gasp. The housing market, Mary explained, was booming. It turned out that George and I had made a very wise investment all those years ago. I bought a small sunny condominium in a new building on the other side of town. It had 2 bedrooms, a small balcony perfect for growing herbs, and a large, bright window in the living room. It was clean, new, and held no ghosts. The process of moving was a process of shedding a skin. I gave away furniture. I donated bags of old clothes. I threw away decades of accumulated clutter. I kept only the things that mattered. George's armchair daughter, my mother's pearls, a box of photographs, my easel, and my paints. My new life was smaller. It was quieter. It was simpler. And it was all mine. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class. I started volunteering at the local library, the quiet hush of the stacks a balm to my soul. I was not just surviving. I was building. From the ground up. And for the first time, the ground was my own. I lived in my new, quiet peace for nearly 6 months. The condominium, with its bright, clean walls and its lack of history, became my sanctuary. I had found a new rhythm, one dictated by the quiet companionship of books, the messy, satisfying work of pottery, and the gentle chatter of my new friends from the book club. I had learned that my own company was not a void to be filled, but a space to be savored. The memory of the confrontation in Alex's beautiful, sterile office had faded, not into nothingness, but into a settled, quiet fact, like a stone at the bottom of a clear, still pond. The past, when it intruded, did not come with a knock at the door or a ring of the telephone. It arrived in my mailbox, in a thick, cream-colored envelope. The paper was expensive. The return address was a law firm in the city, a name I didn't recognize, all polished brass and old money. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was the first time my hands had trembled in months. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in the dense, impenetrable language of lawyers. It took me 3 readings to understand what it was saying. It was a prenuptial agreement. The letter was from a lawyer, representing Alex's fiancée, a woman I had never met, a woman I hadn't even known existed. The agreement was a standard, brutal piece of work. It detailed Alex's assets, the roastery, his stock portfolio, a condominium in the city. And it detailed a request. They needed me to sign a document, a sworn affidavit. It was a statement declaring that I, Evelyn Reed, held no financial stake, past or present, in Ascend Coffee, LLC. It was a legal document designed to formally and forever sever any claim I might have to the empire my son had built. The fiancée, the letter explained with polite, veiled condescension, was a woman of significant family wealth herself. Her attorneys were simply exercising due diligence to protect her interests. They wanted to ensure that no old family entanglements could surface after the wedding. Attached to the letter was the affidavit they had so thoughtfully drafted for me, and a business card for Alex's lawyer, and a self-addressed, stamped envelope for my convenience. I dropped the letter onto my small dining table as if it were a snake. An old family entanglement. That's what I was. That's what my home, my husband's life, my entire financial security had been reduced to. A messy legal loose end that needed to be tied up before a wealthy bride would walk down the aisle. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it stole my breath. Alex hadn't had the courage to call me himself. He hadn't bothered to tell me he was getting married. He had simply outsourced this final, ultimate erasure to a team of expensive lawyers. He was not just denying my contribution anymore. He was attempting to legally nullify it, to make it, in the eyes of the law and the world, as if it had never happened at all. For a moment, the old Evelyn flared up, the one fueled by rage and a sense of profound injustice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the letter to shreds. I wanted to hire my own lawyer and fight him, to drag the whole ugly, secret history out into the light. But then, the new Evelyn, the quiet woman who had found her peace, took a deep breath. She looked around her small, sunny condominium. She saw the pots she had made, clumsy but beautiful, lining the windowsill. She saw the half-finished painting on her easel. She saw the book from her book club, face down on the sofa. She saw the life she had built. A life that was finally, blessedly, free of him. To fight him would be to let him back in. It would be to plunge myself back into the chaos and the drama and the anger. It would be to give him power over my life again, to make him the center of my world. The lawyers would drain my money. The fight would drain my soul. And for what? For an acknowledgement he would never willingly give. For a piece of an empire I no longer wanted. No, my peace was more valuable than that. My quiet, hard-won peace was the only asset that truly mattered. The next morning, I did not call a lawyer. I sat down at my desk with the thick, creamy envelope. I took out the affidavit they had prepared for me. I read it one last time. Evelyn Reed, do hereby swear and affirm that I have no financial interest, claim, or stake. I picked up a pen, a simple, blue ballpoint pen, and I signed my name at the bottom. The signature was clear and steady, but I did not put it in the stamped envelope they had provided. Instead, I took out another piece of paper, my own, and I wrote a short, simple note. It was not addressed to the lawyers. It was not addressed to Alex. It was addressed to the woman whose name I had seen in the legal documents. His fiancée, Amelia. Dear Amelia, I wrote. I have signed the affidavit your lawyers requested. I have no desire for any part of the business. I have enclosed it here. I have also enclosed another document, a copy of it. The original is in a safe deposit box. It is the bank statement confirming that the second mortgage on my former home, the home that provided the entirety of the seed capital for Ascend Coffee, was paid off with my late husband's life insurance. I am not sending this to you as a threat. I want nothing from you or from Alex. I am sending it to you as a gift, a wedding gift of a sort. It is the gift of truth. You are marrying into a story. I thought you deserved to read the original manuscript. I wish you all the best. AZ1. And sincerely, Evelyn Reed. I folded the note. I went to the small, all-in-one printer I had bought for myself. I made a clean, crisp copy of the bank statement, the one from the folder, the one that told the real story. I placed my signed affidavit, my note, and the copied bank statement into a new envelope. My own envelope. I addressed it not to the law firm, but to Miss Amelia Davenport, at the lavish city address listed in the agreement. I put my own stamp on it. Then I walked down to the lobby of my building and dropped it in the outgoing mail slot. The sense of release was absolute. I had not engaged in their battle. I had not played their game. I had simply passed the truth, like a torch, into the one pair of hands that now had the power to do something with it. What she would do, I had no idea. Maybe nothing. Maybe she would throw it away and marry him anyway. The truth a small, inconvenient wrinkle in their otherwise perfect story. Or maybe not. It didn't matter. It was her story now, not mine. My story had a new chapter to begin, and it had nothing to do with them. I had finally, truly, let go. I went back upstairs to my quiet, sunny apartment, put on a kettle for tea, and picked up my paintbrush. I had a sky to finish. The wedding, I later learned, did not happen. There was no dramatic announcement, no public scandal. It simply dissolved. About a month after I had mailed my letter, I saw a small item in the social pages of the newspaper, which someone had left in the community room of my building. It was a brief, discreet notice stating that the engagement between Alexander Ride and Amelia Davenport had been amicably terminated. I felt a quiet, somber sense of vindication. I had not sought revenge, but the truth, it seemed, had its own quiet power. It had its own consequences. I did not hear from Alex. I did not expect to. The silence stretched, and this time I knew it was final. The empire he had built, the one founded on a myth, now had a crack in its foundation. The story had been fact-checked. The seasons turned, and my new life took on a richer, deeper texture. My small condominium became a true home, filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the evidence of a life being actively lived. My paintings grew bolder. My pottery became less clumsy. My friendships, forged over discussions of books and the shared frustrations of a stubborn garden plot, were easy and unburdened. They were relationships of mutual respect and shared interests, not of obligation or need. I sold my first painting. It was a small landscape of the ocean, inspired by a weekend trip I had taken with my book club. A man bought it at a local art fair. He paid me $200. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the fact that someone had looked at something I had created, something that had come purely from me, and seen value in it. I framed the check. It was more valuable to me than the entire net worth of a cent coffee. One autumn afternoon, I was at the library, volunteering, stacking returned books onto a cart. The quiet, peaceful rhythm of the work was a form of meditation. I heard a small, hesitant voice say my name. Evelyn? I turned. It was a young woman I didn't recognize. She was elegantly dressed, with intelligent, serious eyes. "I'm Amelia Davenport," she said. My heart gave a single, hard jolt. I stood frozen, a book about the history of Rome in my hand. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice quiet and sincere. I've wanted to find you for a while, to thank you." "Thank me for what?" I managed to say. "For the letter," she said. "For the gift of truth. You saved me from making a terrible mistake. I was marrying a story. It wasn't a true one." We stood there for a moment in the quiet aisle, between history and biography. Two women whose lives had been briefly, strangely, intersected by the same man, the same story. "He's selling the company," she said quietly. "I heard he's moving out west. To start over. I hope he finds what he's looking for," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. His life, his story, had no more power over me. It was just a book I had read a long time ago. "I think you already have," she said, with a small, sad smile. She gestured around at the quiet, sunlit library. "It looks like peace." "Yes," I said, "it is." She left a few moments later, and I never saw her again. She was just a final, quiet footnote in a chapter of my life that was now definitively closed. I finished stacking my books, my mind calm, my heart steady. I had not just survived. I had prevailed. Not by fighting, but by letting go. Not by demanding my worth, but by quietly building it for myself. This morning, I am sitting on my small balcony. The air is crisp and clean. My herb garden is thriving. A pot of rosemary, a pot of thyme, a pot of basil. Small, simple, living things. My coffee is in a mug I made myself, its shape a little lopsided, its glaze imperfect, but it fits my hand perfectly. I am looking at a sketch I made for a new painting, a self-portrait. It's the first one I've ever attempted. The face looking back at me from the page is not young. It is lined with the evidence of a long and complicated life, but the eyes are clear, and they are looking forward. So, that's my story. Or what's left of it, after all the fictions were burned away. It's not really a story about a business, or a house, or a second mortgage. It's a story about being invisible, and about the slow, quiet, and profoundly radical act of deciding to be seen. Maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you are the silent partner in someone else's life, the ghostwriter of their success, the one whose sacrifices are the invisible foundation upon which their grand story is built. You are the wind in their sails, the ground beneath their feet, the quiet, uncredited producer of their life's work. And you have told yourself that this is love, that this is loyalty, that this is your role. But a role in someone else's story is not a life. And a love that requires your erasure is not love at all. It is consumption. The world will gladly accept your invisibility. It will praise your selflessness, your sacrifice. It will let you give and give and give until you are nothing but a ghost haunting the hallways of your own life. And it will not thank you for it. My journey back to myself didn't begin with a shout. It began with the quiet unfolding of a few old documents on a kitchen table. It began with the realization that the truth was a story that deserved to be told, even if I was the only one who would ever read it. Your story deserves to be told. Your contributions deserve to be acknowledged. Your life deserves to be your own. So I will leave you with this. Look at the stories being told around you. The stories of your family, your work, your relationships. And then ask yourself a simple question. Am I in this story? Or am I just the paper it's written on? You don't have to set the world on fire. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to quietly present a forgotten invoice. To remind the world, and more importantly, yourself, that you have paid your dues. And that you are worth more than you have been credited for. If you have a story of your own, I would be honored to hear it. This is a quiet place, and we have all the time in the world.